All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Don't look now, folks, but the college football season is right around the corner as we're 2 weeks away from the start of the chase for the national championship to see who is going to be the team that wins it all. Now, I want to start things off today by talking about the Big Ten Conference. And of course, this offseason has seen the Big Ten flex their muscles, so to speak. We've seen the additions of USC and UCLA. Now it gives the Big Ten a coast to coast presence as they will now be a 16 team conference. But with that said, for the 14 teams that will contend for the Big Ten championship this year, who is it going to be that will be the last team standing in Indianapolis at the beginning of December? Now, I want to start off with the Ohio State Buckeyes. And the Buckeyes are going to be looking to win their fifth Big Ten championship in the last 6 years. And for Ohio State, they're going to be coming into this season with a chip on their shoulders because they know that they let one get away last year. Two conference losses, and of course, for the first time in a month of Sundays, the Buckeyes lost to Michigan. And then, of course, Michigan returned a favor from what they've seen for so many years recently, where they ended up losing to Ohio State and had to sit back and watch Ohio State go on and win the Big Ten. Last year, it was Michigan that won the big game, and then of course they went on to win the Big Ten conference and get to the college football playoff. But nonetheless, for head coach Ryan Day and his team, I think the Buckeyes will definitely be motivated coming into this season. Quarterback CJ Stroud, to me, I think he's going to be the Big Ten player of the year. This kid at quarterback can do it all, both as a runner and a passer. And you think about the talent that he has returning. I know that the Buckeyes did lose some talent in the offseason or to the NFL, but nonetheless, there's always, plenty of spare parts, so to speak, in Columbus for this team. You think about running back Travion Henderson, who is a blur and very difficult to stop for opposing defenses. Then you think about the receivers, and I'm talking about Jackson Smith and Jingba and Marvin Harrison Jr. Good luck to DBs around the Big Ten trying to slow them down. And I know that Ohio State, has a tough schedule. It's not easy, but I think the Buckeyes, will be able to answer the bell. You think about it, they host Notre Dame on September 3rd, they host Wisconsin on September 24th. And both of those teams always feel like they can get to Indy for the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State will be at Michigan State on October the 8th. They're home for Iowa on October 22nd. They're at Penn State on the 29th of October, which is always a big game in Happy Valley. They're at Northwestern on November 5th. And then, of course, the big game in Columbus on the 26th. You look at the Michigan Wolverines, and they're looking to build off of last year's run to the college football playoff. And, for Jim Harbaugh, he had it so difficult last year where he was really coaching for his job. And in doing so, his team answered the bell. Michigan was a darn good team all year long. Had a tough one loss in the regular season on the road against Michigan State, very winnable game. But the Wolverines did rebound. They beat Penn State on the road, of course, beating Ohio State, winning the Big Ten championship, and then, of course, getting to the college football playoff. It's going to be a little bit tougher this year for Michigan. Of course, Harbaugh flirted with going to the NFL or back to the NFL to coach the Minnesota Vikings. Didn't work out. Now he's at Michigan, but in the process, Harbaugh lost both of his offensive coordinators. Both of his coordinators. Offensive coordinator Josh Gaddis left to take the same position at the University of Miami, while defensive coordinator Michael McDonald left Michigan to coach with Harbaugh's brother John in the NFL as a D coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, you still have Cade McNamara at quarterback, and you still have running back Blake Corum. But I think it's going to be a little bit tougher for Michigan this year. I think with Harbaugh not being there, or like you really not knowing what was going to happen for that period after the season, whether or not he was going to the NFL or not. That was very difficult on this program, and I think Michigan's going to take a step back. With that said, this year, and you look at some of the key games for Michigan this year, they're at Iowa on the 1st of October. They're home for Penn State on the 15th of October, which could be a big game. They're home for Michigan State on the 29th. And you think about that game last year in East Lansing, it was a classic. And then, of course, traveling to Columbus to end the regular season. And I guarantee you the Buckeyes will definitely be looking for revenge this time around. You look at the Penn State Nittany Lions, and for this team, they're looking to be a player in the Big Ten. And I say that because Penn State started off last year 5-0, and things were looking good. And then they had a bad second half of the season as they lost 6 out of their last 8 games, which included losses to Ohio State, Michigan State, and Michigan. And those are the big 3 teams that you have to contend with in order to win the Big Ten East and, of course, get to Indianapolis. For James Franklin, he got that big extension in the offseason as the folks in Happy Valley were looking to prevent him from leaving to go to another big program. So he's going to be sewn up financially in Happy Valley for a very long time. Quarterback Sean Clifford, he's back and he's looking to exercise some demons. He's been up at times with his play, and he's been down at times with his play. But the bottom line is hopefully that extra year of experience is going to be just what the doctor ordered for both him and this Penn State offense. Penn State, they did lose some talent on offense to the NFL, but you still have wide receiver Parker Washington, and I expect him to be the go-to guy in the passing game for Mr. Clifford. Penn State is going to be dealing with a daunting schedule. They begin the year on the road in West Lafayette at Purdue. And of course, since the Big Ten has expanded their conference members, some of their teams right out of the chute, they're playing conference games, and that's not going to be an easy one for the Nittany Lions. At Auburn on the 17th of September, and you remember last year, Auburn came to Happy Valley, and that was a very close game that Penn State was able to eke out. At Michigan on the 15th of October, and you remember how close that this game was last year. They're home for Ohio State on the 29th. That's always a big game. They're home for Michigan State on the 26th of October. And then no Wisconsin or Iowa this year. That's big because you remember Penn State early in the season went to Camp Randall, or actually they began the season at Camp Randall rather, with a win last year. And then they lost a close one on the road in Iowa City. So you look at the Michigan State Spartans, and the Spartans, they were 11-2 last year, and they're ready to once again become a consistent contender in the Big Ten Conference. Mel Tucker pushed all the right buttons as the head coach for Michigan State last year. But one thing for me that was alarming, you think about Mel Tucker and you think about D, and whether it was his time as a college defensive coordinator or working in the pros. That was not the case last year for Michigan State, as the Spartans were 110th in the nation in total D last year. Now, offensively, you're returning quarterback Peyton Thorne, and that's going to be important. But Michigan State has to find a way to replace Kenneth Walker III at running back because he was a tone setter, because he got physical yards with the Spartans last year, and he really set the tone for this offense. Senior wide receiver Jaden Reed should be able to have a big impact, especially when you think about this passing game and you're going to have 3 seniors on that offensive line for the green and white. That's going to be important. Defensively, sophomore outside linebacker Cal Halliday could have a big impact for this defense, as they're definitely going to have to play better in all phases of it if they want to once again be a player in the Big Ten East. For Michigan State, they step out of conference on the 17th of September to go to play a Pac-12 opponent in Seattle against Washington. Big one at home on the 8th of October against Ohio State, which is followed by a home meeting with Wisconsin on the 15th. And then they're at Michigan on the 29th. I talked about the thriller that we saw last year in East Lansing, and then they're at Penn State to end the regular season on the 26th. of November. Now, for Mike Locksley and Maryland, they're looking to make some noise in the Big Ten East. You have a veteran quarterback and Taulia Tagovailoa, of course, his big brother Tua plays in the NFL for the Dolphins. And junior wide receiver Raheem Jarrett could be a problem for secondaries around the Big Ten. I think what Maryland's going to have to do, they got to take care of their business against the teams that they're supposed to beat. Because you think about Maryland, Indiana, and Rutgers in that Big Ten East. You got to deal with Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State each year. Not a easy quartet to deal with. For Rutgers, speaking of that, Greg Schiano's return to Rutgers has yet to lead to a winning season as the Scarlet Knights record over the past 2 years is just 8-14. Now, Rutgers was 120th in the nation last year in total offense. That has to change if they're going to find a way to be an impact player in the Big Ten Conference. And, for Rutgers, to me, what I'm seeing right now, and I've talked about this periodically, they took the money to join the Big Ten. And in doing so, they sacrificed any winning that they were having because they were having some success in the new Big East Conference, but they took the payday, and now again, you got to deal with Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State every single year. 4 games right there before you even talk about who else you have to play. And I think for Rutgers, they're really dealing with it because at least in the Big East, Rutgers was able to have some semblance of order as far as getting some quality kids from Jersey to stay home and play. And joining the Big Ten, those kids, they're going out of conference, whether it's to the Big Ten or the SEC. So it's once again tough for the Scarlet Knights. For Indiana, they want to try to find a way to get back on track after their 10-loss season. But at the end of the day, they're going to get caught up in the wash that is the Big Ten. Now, in the Big Ten West, you look at Nebraska. Scott Frost, his tenure has not lived up to the hype. So far as a former Cornhusker quarterback is just 15-29 in 4 years at the helm. Now, Nebraska went 3-9 last season for their worst year in more than 60 years, but they got to try to find a way to make a comeback and be a player in the Big Ten West this year. Now, they're picking up a quarterback in Casey Thompson, the Texas transfer. That's going to be big for them. And then you look at some of the returning players on D, a junior middle linebacker, Luke Reimer, and then sophomore linebacker, Nick Henrik. They've got to be able to, to have an impact and kind of get that black shirt swag back that we saw for so many years in Lincoln with this club. Now for Nebraska, it's going to be so important for them to get off to a hot start. They begin the season 2 weeks from today in Ireland against Northwestern. So both of these clubs are going to Europe to have a conference game. It's going to be very important for Nebraska to get off to a strong start. They host Oklahoma on the 17th of September. And of course, for old school college football fans, we remember how important, this game was. Nebraska and Oklahoma in their days in the Big 8 conference didn't meet as much in the Big 12, but definitely in the Big 8 conference. This was always a big game the day after Thanksgiving. Nonetheless, a non-conference affair here. Maybe Nebraska can catch Oklahoma napping, so to speak, as they are going to be getting adjusted to life under Brent Venables as their new head football coach. But then getting into the meat and potatoes, if you will, of Nebraska's conference slate at Purdue on the 15th of October. They're home for Minnesota on the 5th of November, at Michigan on the 12th of November. Very big right there. Then they're home for Wisconsin on the 19th. And then the day after Thanksgiving, they're at Iowa. And in my opinion, that could be a game right there that could decide who goes to Indy and represents the Big Ten West. Now, speaking of Iowa, they're looking to make it consecutive appearances in the Big Ten championship game. Kirk Ferentz is entering his 24th year as the head football coach at Iowa. It doesn't seem like that long, but the years have just simply chugged along for him there. The Hawkeyes lost a ton of talent from last year's team, but definitely keep an eye on senior linebacker Jack Campbell. You think about Iowa under Kirk Ferentz, and he continuously produces quality defensive players at each level, whether it be on the D line, linebacker, and of course in the secondary. Now, for the Hawkeyes, they always step out of state, pardon me, out of conference rather, and stay in state to take on the Cyclones out of the Big 12 conference. Always a big game. The Cyclones will be coming to Iowa City on the 10th of September. Iowa will host Michigan on the 1st of October. They're at Ohio State on the 22nd. And Iowa typically is one of those teams that if you don't pay attention to them, they can give you a hard time. So Ohio State definitely has to pay attention to that game. The Hawkeyes will host Northwestern on the 29th of October. They're at Purdue on the 5th of November. They're home for Wisconsin on the 12th of November. They're at Minnesota on the 19th of November. And then, like I just mentioned, that big one against Nebraska on the 25th of November, the day after Thanksgiving. You look at Purdue, they're coming off of their best season in nearly 2 decades. And for Jeff Brom, he wants to try to build off of that and let's see what the Boilermakers have for an encore. Quarterback Aiden McConnell has been solid and steady for Purdue. Now, no more David Bell at wide receiver, but you still have wide receiver Milton Wright, who should definitely get some attention. And you think about Purdue last year as the Spoilermakers and what they were able to do. And obviously they crept up on some people last year. Not going to be the case this year, but I still think that Purdue is going to be very formidable. You think about that season opener when they host Penn State on the 1st of September. That's going to be a big game right there. At Minnesota on the 1st of October. They're home for Nebraska on the 15th of November. At Wisconsin on the 22nd of October. And then another big one when they host Iowa on the 5th of November. So you look at the Illini and Brett Bielema, and he's trying to get them to their first winning season since 2010, as it's been so difficult for Illinois. You think about Brett Bielema teams, they love to run the football, so you can expect a healthy dose of junior running back Chase Brown this year. Junior inside linebacker Tariq Barnes could, make some waves in the Big Ten West, and that's going to be vital for Illinois and Brett Bielema as he's looking to build this program. Now, for Wisconsin, they've never really been a team that's full of stars, regardless of who the coach was. Now it's Paul Chryst. Of course, you think about so many glory years under Barry Alvarez and then Brett Bielema, but they continue to win games, and they won 9 games last year for the 5th time in the last 7 years under Paul Chryst. Sophomore running back Braylon Allen. This guy's going to be a problem. And you think about the Badgers, they always have a quality offensive line to open holes for their running backs. And I think Braylon Allen should be able to benefit from that. Now, Wisconsin had the top ranked defense in the nation last year, and they're once again going to be stingy. You look at linebacker Nick Herbig as well as senior free safety Don Torchio, as they can be playmakers for this unit. Big one for Wisconsin on the 24th of September as they travel to Columbus to take on the Buckeyes. They're at Iowa on the 12th of November. Huge one right there. At Nebraska on the 19th. And then they're home for Minnesota on the 26th. All three of those games are going to go a long way in deciding who wins the Big Ten West. Now, moving along with things here in the Big Ten, got a couple other teams to talk about here in the Big Ten. You look at the Minnesota Golden Gophers, and the expectations were high for Minnesota coming into last season. Didn't get started on the right foot. They had an opportunity to make some waves to begin the year when they hosted Ohio State. That game got away from them late in the second half, especially when they lost their bread and butter. And I'm talking about running back Muhammad Ibrahim for the entire year with a foot injury. He's back and he's healthy, and he's going to be running behind a veteran offensive line with 4 seniors on it. And for Tanner Morgan, he's going to try to get his productivity back to what we saw from him a couple of years ago when the Gophers got off to that strong start. Now, Minnesota had the 3rd-ranked defense in the nation last year, and that's once again going to be important if they want to try to make some waves for head coach PJ Fleck in the Big Ten West. For Minnesota, a big one on the 1st of October when they host Purdue. They're at Penn State on the 22nd of October. They're at Nebraska on the 5th of November. They're home for Iowa on the 19th, and then they're at Wisconsin on the 26th. And then finally, you have Northwestern. Now, the Wildcats made the Big Ten championship game in 2020, but things just never came together for them last year. For Pat Fitzgerald, he's looking to turn things around and get the Wildcats back on track. One big thing for Northwestern that has to improve is their offense. They were 116th in the nation last year in total offense. And if that's going to change, running backs, Evan Hull, as well as Mike Gallagher, need to have an impact. I talked about that game to begin the season in Ireland against Nebraska, but then the Wildcats host Penn State on the 1st of October. They're home for Wisconsin. Pardon me, they're at Penn State on the 1st of October. They're home for Wisconsin on the 8th of October. They're at Iowa on the 29th. They host Ohio State on the 5th of November. They're at Minnesota on the 12th of November. And then they're at Purdue on the 19th of November. And then, of course, they finish at home against the Illini. So if you ask me who's going to survive this difficult Big Ten, first and foremost in the East, I feel that Ohio State is the head of the class. They're head and shoulders above everybody else. And I think it's going to be a battle between Michigan, Michigan State, and Penn State for that second spot. And you think about Ohio State, I really think they're going to come into this season with a chip on their shoulders after, the way that last year ended, because they know they let one guy get away. I think we saw a prelude to that when they were able to go out and beat a good Utah team in last year's Rose Bowl. And I think the Buckeyes are definitely going to try to build off of that. Now, you look at the West, and for my money, this is going to be a battle because a lot of these teams are so even. You look at Nebraska. I think Nebraska is really going to step up and play some better ball for Scott Frost this year. Iowa is always tough, and the same could be said about Wisconsin. Purdue is going to be in that mix, as well as Minnesota. And with that all said, all of those teams, I think they're going to be jockeying throughout the season to try to get that top mark in the West. But I think when it's all said and done, I'm going to roll with Minnesota to win the Big Ten West, get to Indianapolis for the first time where they'll have to dance with Ohio State. But at the end of the day, I don't see anybody in the Big Ten slowing down the Buckeyes. I think this team is ready to go back and reclaim their throne as champions of the Big Ten. And with that said, if that's going to be the case, that's bad news for everybody else in that conference. But nonetheless, college football is right around the corner. I'm raring to go. I know you're raring to go. And the 27th of August cannot get here quick enough. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I am signing off, saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.